Thank you.
Good. Hello, welcome. Welcome to the audience and welcome to our panelists, Jessica Lauren Elizabeth Taylor and Nora Loehle. I'm very happy, I'm pleased that I have the chance to moderate this panel on the eve of the presidential elections in the United States. Only 24, 20, 30 hours to go, maybe a little more, that the first results will be out, not the final results for sure. The presidential election in the US will certainly not only be decisive for where the US is going, but also for pretty much how politics will evolve in Europe, in Germany and in various other parts of the world. So I'm very happy that our little panel will represent quite different, diverse perspectives. With Jessica, you have come from the US, from Florida, the way you have crossed the Atlantic to settle in Berlin for 11 years, and now you are residing with your family in Oslo, Norway. And Nora has gone in the opposite direction, from Stuttgart to Berlin and then to Washington, DC. So this is a geographical first description of your different life worlds and perspectives you have been developing. And then, of course, also in terms of what you are doing and how you are trained. So Jessica is an artist and political activist, community organizer. She has done work through performance, text, dialogue for Black, Indigenous people of color, which brings very colorful perspectives to our panel, which otherwise, as political science, I am myself a political scientist, and also Nora Loehle, you are a political scientist, but also practitioner in terms of you have assisted a Green MP in the German Bundestag, and now for 4 years you are working with the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Washington, DC. So we are trying an interdisciplinary dialogue from art, activism, political science, so bringing together aesthetical and analytical and also more political, practical perspectives. I should say why I find this so inspiring, the composition and the theme of our panel. I'm myself a comparative political scientist, and with some years of teaching and research at Cornell University in the US, in the state of New York, and for many years in Bremen. And so comparing is all what I find fascinating, because it helps broaden our perspectives, all the more when we compare perspectives from different quarters of our societies. So to start our conversation regarding the US presidential elections, which we have entitled Overcoming the Autocratic Challenge, or paraphrasing a book by Masha Gessen, Surviving Autocracy. This is what she has developed in her book, which came out this year, and she presented and discussed it just last weekend here in Bremen. So this is very timely. That we discuss this perspective, but from more concrete angles. Before we will discuss autocratic challenges and how to overcome, how to cope with them from a progressive perspective in different fields of struggle, we could say. One is the international realm of politics with respect to US and Europe, European Union in particular. The second is the norms and practices, the challenges by the norms and practices of male white supremacists. And the third is the fate of democracy. But before we get into a deeper conversation, I would like to ask you, what do you find, what is troubling you if you think of these elections and how they might change the world that we still know today? So, Jessica, Nora, what are your sorrows, your preoccupations with respect to this?
Thank you so much, Ulrike, for the introduction, and thank you to Heinrich Böll Institute for having us today. So first I wanted to comment on the role of the US, the United States, on the world stage, and on this historic election, just as the last election was historic. And that is to say, to use those air quotes, is to say that now that the rest of the world has seen the gross discrepancies in policy from the US government, perhaps they can begin to feel on a very, very small scale an ounce of empathy with Black, Indigenous, people of color communities that have been terrorized by the US government for decades, for hundreds of years. Because for Black, Indigenous communities, every election is like rolling a set of dice. Every election is a waiting game to see how it will affect the rest of your life, not just for the next 4 years, but in fact your entire life, for the next, for the livelihood of your children and your children's children for generations to come. So that's what really troubles me. These past 4 years under number 45 especially have been so damaging and have gone so far backwards, and have erased so many historic wins that were put on by previous administrations, that where we would go if 45 were to be elected again would be deeply, deeply not troubling and not even alarming, but chaotic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you give an example
Of
the rollbacks?
Oh, so I mean, one of the most recent examples was the new appointment of the Supreme Court justices. Mm-hmm. This was something that the Republican parties had blocked at every turn when President Obama tried to appoint new justices before the end of his term. Even, I think, 13 months before the end of his term once, and they instated a rule that they actually broke to bring in a new justice. And now the Supreme Court is tilting again towards more conservative. And this has the potential to be extremely damaging for women's rights. So that is the rights of people who identify as female, the rights of people with uteruses. This has the potential to go back, to undo lots of policy that has been very crucial and critical for these people particularly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Nora, what would you see as most troubling with respect to these elections?
Yeah, thank you, Ulrike, for your introductions, and it's a pleasure to have this conversation with Jessica and you. So, I mean, living here in DC, obviously a very challenging time has been coming up since March with the pandemic, and clearly a total like non-existence of any political management towards that. And coming from Europe, I obviously was a lot in touch with my family and friends back home in Europe, and saw how differently other governments around the world, right, have dealt with the pandemic, and trying to work together with their local policymakers, with states, finding solutions, find common responses. Whereas here in the US, we have been clearly, everyone like is on their own. Like seriously, there's no clear communication what this pandemic means. The government doesn't help people at all. Like, and of course it starts with the reality that in this country, we don't have a social system where there is sort of the safety for everyone here to have access to healthcare, which clearly first is for the individual person very dramatic, but then also it doesn't help, right, to get around a pandemic. Also, if people don't have access to healthcare or have fear to go and see any medical advice, and then with the development of then the pandemic and the infection rates getting stronger and stronger, and it's not only New York City, which, right, we have seen the pictures and sort of the tremendous outcome of the pandemic, but it's really all over the country. It's in rural areas, it's in many cities. And maybe just also to echo what Jessica has said, the traumatic of this pandemic again has shown that there's such a strong racism in this country. And it's, for example, reflected again in the infection rates of people of color who are, depending which studies you look at, but they are they have the risk to get infected by the coronavirus up to 5 times more likely. And that is due to many reasons. Again, it's the loss, it's the lack of access to healthcare. It's also due to the work many of those communities, the jobs they have. So they are a way higher percentage, the ones who still need to go out there and do the job they have. They are very often essential workers, which are very needed. So nurses, any sort of protective workforce, but therefore they are also facing a way higher risk to get infected. And then, in addition to that, we see like the non-existence of a government in place, which doesn't help people get through a financial and an economic crisis, which of course now accelerated so much in the last month. So we see a lot of people who now don't know any longer how to pay their rent next month. We see longer and longer queues in front of churches who are handing out food every day. Here in my neighborhood, it's a mix of a Latina community, and also it's a very old traditional Black community. My neighborhood is called Columbia Heights in Washington, D.C. And so it's just very dramatic to see how people really fear for their lives, right? And again, we can see again, there is strong racism embedded in the system. So I would say, yeah, I mean, the elections are coming up, but I see way more actually this fear of survival right now than even the election and whatever outcome we will see. Because again, right here, we are still in the middle of a pandemic combined with an economic crisis. And there's not healthcare access for everyone here. That's what we are at.
Mm-hmm. So would you see a more positive perspective if Biden-Harris would prevail, would win the elections? Is there more hope or more trust that these crises, you said the pandemic, the economic, the social, the unemployment crisis, yeah, a health crisis, that these would improve? Are there any indicators?
Should I try to comment first, and then Jessica, maybe you add? Because again, I think we bring very different perspective, and it's worth to hear different voices on this. But so as far as I have sort of, let's say, studied Biden and Harris platform they are running on, I would say of course, there's definitely hope that there would be some sort of improvement. And it does start with the point that Biden has committed to improving the healthcare system and making sure that there's more access to healthcare for more people than we have now. So that's good. But it's important to also mention that somebody from the Democratic Party like Bernie Sanders, who actually calls for health care access for everyone in this country, Biden has not agreed on this. So he has sort of gone further than he was before, saying that he would again improve healthcare access for many Americans. But at the same time, again, we're not talking about like access for everyone. I am also not sure. I mean, he brought in Kamala Harris, which some people here definitely see as a sort of sign of hope and excitement, that at least it's a woman. She's not as old, at least. She is a woman of color. But at the same time, I hear especially a lot of voices from the Black community who don't have a trusted feeling towards this woman. So the hopes that Biden together with Harris would sort of within 1 year solve the whole situation of discrimination and racism in this country and within the institutions, I think is limited, let's say. But again, of course, compared to what we have now with Trump in place, obviously it would be an improvement. And the hope would be that at least it would be a step back towards democratic institutions and working with those institutions. And I could imagine that they definitely come up with some hopeful policy. But also, again, there's not an excitement. Jessica, what do you think?
Nora, you said almost exactly everything that I wanted to say, really. You captured it, the spirit that I've been seeing and hearing from family members back home in the US, on social media, and Biden, the choosing Biden, voting for Biden was a choice that a lot of people made reluctantly. And voting for Biden felt like putting a Band-Aid on a festering wound. And I'm not sure how much hope we can hold out for that administration. I think, as Nora said, a lot of people would be relieved, for the devil you know beats the devil you don't. And it would, again, hopefully be a return to some of the more fair practices and policies. At least it wouldn't be an all-out assault, which is what's been happening. You saw just a month ago with number 45 banning diversity and inclusion workshops. And so those are the kind of things where it's like every day felt like an assault, whereas we were hopefully moving towards more inclusive practices, which is what we would be promised with a Biden-Harris administration.
Mm-hmm. And now, taking a view on the international sphere, so conflict and cooperation. From an EU perspective, the Trump years have been really very destructive. So from the first interview on, there was an European Union bashing, so which didn't really inspire much trust and hope that cooperation could emerge. And in fact, now there are many hopes that a Biden agenda for transatlantic relations would really reinforce democratic states, the cooperation of democratic states, and the alliance, the partnership with respect to democratic values on the one hand, and also the international agenda, which is important for combating climate change, for example. So what is your take on that? Are these illusions, or would you say there are real opportunities? You would see real opportunities in a change of the administration?
I would definitely hope for more transatlantic cooperations and agreements. I think that, you know, President Obama did a decent job of creating bridges and building bridges that were in effect largely destroyed by number 45. And I think that the relations have been so tense the past 4 years. And hopefully there could be a coming together. I really don't know. I think that a lot of European countries that also claim to be democratic have also been skewing more conservative. And so I think it's important for those countries as well to, I mean, Germany included, to take stock in their own conditioning and their own kind of imagining of what a democratic society would look like.
Mm-hmm. And Nora, with respect to the Paris Agreement to protect the climate, what is your view?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with this regard, I can really see sort of two sides. So my personal experience living in this country really has been, I have met so many amazing people all over this country, like road tripping around. And so often when I mean, I can't obviously even hide that I'm from Europe, right? My accent is so clearly that's always sort of the first point which comes out, like, wow, you're from Germany. And then there's so many people here who have a sort of relationship towards Germany or another European country. The reactions I get are very positive, and I hear a lot of those stories. Wow, my uncle has served at a US base in Germany. I have done a semester abroad in France. So there's a lot of excitement and, again, personal relationship towards European countries, which makes me very happy, but also sort of hopeful. With regard to the world we are at right now, right? Because again, within the personal relationships, I feel like there are strong ties over generations. They were built, and again, they are very positive and also grateful from both sides. The other side I do see, and I learned that especially by having conversations with actually staff at the Hill who are working for House representatives or senators. I have talked to some extent even to Republican staff in the last couple of years, more so to Democratic staff from very different regions in the US. And what they have reported as a huge challenge and struggle within their own constituencies in the last year is that they have a harder and harder time to explain in a way to people why international institutions such as the NATO, or something like why it's important that a country like the US joins a Paris Climate Agreement to fight climate change jointly with the global community. And obviously also, which is part of that, takes financial responsibilities, commits to targets, does steps towards fighting climate change or fighting terrorism or trying to contribute to a global peace. Any of those huge challenges we face, right? Or when we face these big challenges of migration and refugees who need to flee their own countries for very different, those are all challenges we all face together. And again, they do tell me that they have a hard time to explain to people why the US in particular needs to play a strong and responsible role in those global challenges. And people sort of question those international institutions more and more, always coming from we have so many challenges back home here. We need to fight, right? We need a social welfare system. Some regions face huge unemployment rates because, again, I mean, there's huge transformations going on, right? We have heard that, I think it's not entirely true, but there is this story that mainly coal communities, so states like Kentucky, West Virginia, Virginia, have voted for Trump in a bigger extent last time, just because he has addressed their sort of situation of not having perspective, having lost their jobs in the last years, right? Because they are in an industry like coal, which faces a lot of change and declines. So again, what makes me a little worried is the fact that here in the US, we see so many domestic struggles, and I think it's important to address them, but at the same time, without the US, we can't fight those global challenges, right? But politicians have to make sure to sit down with people and explain why they can and will do both at the same time.
Yeah, and how both are connected, that domestic issues, problems can't be meaningfully resolved or effectively resolved without also overcoming the trade wars, for example. So the trade war has raised the trade deficit of the US, vis-a-vis China and the world. It's grown in the past 4 years. Unemployment has grown. So protectionism doesn't really help to solve domestic issues. We see it also in Europe. So therefore, maybe controlled globalization, regulated, socially, ecologically regulated globalization should be the agenda. But to bring these two spheres together, it's not the domestic, either the domestic or the international politics which counts. But we see this also in Europe. It's difficult to explain this to the electorate, no? That this is true. So getting to the question of the identity politics, or let's say how under the Trump administration, the tweet politics, how the feeling, the sense of who Americans are, how this has changed over the past years. This is my perception from what we read and hear, that from a European perspective, America was home to democracy, and it was home to a multicultural society of immigrants, which has been built on inclusion and integration of the melting pot. Yeah. So, and now this seems to have come under threat, under pressure, that I'm wondering how you see these pressures and the outcomes, what you see in the reality of life in the US.
I just wanted to say that I think both can be true, that it was still a beautiful place full of many different immigrant and Native communities, indigenous communities. And it is also a place of centuries old white supremacy. It can be both, and it is. And I think the last 4 years, a lot of people have seen that supremacy be made more emboldened by various administrations, various governments around the world, including the US, the UK, large populations of Europe, Latin America. And I like to use the term that the scholar Bell Hooks uses, which is imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal structures. So Bell Hooks doesn't focus on the oppressive institutions of just racism, but sees how all of the oppressive institutions of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, how they're interconnected. And for a lot of us in the BIPOC community, we have seen this emboldening play out in our workplaces, in our governmental policies. Every day there's been a sort of terror or terrorism in the streets. I know I've been subjected to it in Berlin at an alarming rate the past, I would say 5 years, and then more shockingly so the past 3 years. And a lot of communities adjacent to mine in Berlin, LGBTQIA communities, have also been subjected to real violence, physical violence. And through social media, through the Black Lives Matter movement, the global movement, a lot of people outside of the BIPOC community are just beginning to witness this terror and terrorism. So I think for a lot of people, it looks like, oh, wait, this is new. This is strange. This isn't what we're used to seeing. But it is actually, and I think it will be important for people who benefit from white supremacy, which is a lot of us, to rise up against it in their workplace, in their homes, to confront these structures, to dismantle them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any comment, Nora, on that?
Yeah, I mean, Jessica, I think, has just put it in words. Clearly, this country nor Germany has ever overcome, right, discrimination against different groups of people within our society, which some still call minorities. But living here again in the United States since 4 years, I would definitely say it has become way more hostile again for very different groups. And it comes with that we sort of saw a backlash starting with debates we thought we would have had overcome. So we had something like this debate coming back, that sort of a non-gender bathroom, right, in public spaces was questioned again. So abortion again is a topic in many states here where they question if abortion should be possible and has given access at all to women. So, and then not even speaking to closing up their borders, and something to just maybe also make clear to a European audience that this US government in place right now has sort of, in this whole hassle within the last years, they now use the pandemic for another reason to close up this country even more so. So right now we are in a situation that no one, only US citizens and people who have a green card, which is a very privileged sort of person, can access the United States. Anyone else who has a valid but normal work visa can't re-enter the US if you are not in the US right now. Not speaking of all the undocumented people who have been living here in this country, some since they have been born in this country, but still don't have any legal status in this country. They study here, they go to school here, they work here, they pay taxes here. But when it comes to being part of the society, they don't. They are not gonna have the possibility to go and vote tomorrow. They don't exist here. They just try to survive every day and not being discovered. That's what's the situation in this country. We still have something like the Muslim travel ban in place since more than 2 years. People from specific countries are banned to enter this country just because of the country they come from, with the reasoning that they come from dangerous terroristic countries. But in fact, they are just like defined as Muslim-dominated countries, and that's why those people don't get access. So it's, I mean, and so I could sort of, yeah, come up with a huge list of how, again, discriminatory and hostile this like country is right now, that it's frightening for sure.
Yeah, you express this, you articulate this sense of frightening, of feeling frightened. My question would be, is it possible to cope with these movements, racist, in Germany we would say also anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, Muslim, yeah, movements, to confront them without being infected by their hatred, by this anger that they mobilize among their supporters? Do you see in the US, in the progressive, in the democratic movement, a concern about how to, yeah, if Michelle Obama said, she once said famously, when they go low, we go high. Has this some reality right now in this situation, in these confrontations?
It's a really difficult question, because I think for a lot of people, you know, the last election, I'm thinking of Black women who voted in the majority for Hillary Clinton over white women demographically, according to the numbers. And I'm thinking of the disappointment that they experienced in being passed over and looked over again. I'm thinking of, yeah, Michelle Obama's old quote now. And if it really has some resonance, I mean, I think to my community, the Black Indigenous community, I say, in order to cope, to choose rest. I think rest is a huge form of resistance, a radical form of resistance. The whole self-care movement has been totally co-opted from its originator, which was Audre Lorde, a Berliner herself. And I don't, to answer your other question, no, I don't think it's possible to not be infected, to not be affected. I think that it's important. I can only speak for myself. With the rest, I can only speak for myself as well. But with this, I think it's important to use that anger to channel it into something. For me, it's my art. But I don't think it's possible to not feel it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now, getting to the question which many observers from Germany, from Europe, is following us without having found answers. How is it possible that despite all these destructive effects of the 4 Trump presidential years, that there, with economic stagnation or recession, with a loss of jobs, with skyrocketing, with an increasing public debt, with all these policies putting in place deregulation and dismantling what Obama has created in terms of healthcare, with the deep gulf in the society of enmity, of hatred, how is it possible that there are still maybe 35–40% of solid Trump voters? We do not know the overall figure, because polls can be wrong. They have been wrong in the past. They have been misleading. At least in the moment, today, if we check the data, we see there is a solid lead of Biden with respect to Trump, but still there are at least a third, if not 40%, of Trump voters. So how to explain this? Who are these constituencies? What insights can you convey to us? Yeah, Jessica or Nora?
Should I go first and give it a try? I don't even, yeah, it's a hard question because you really have to put yourself into a different mind. And then maybe, yeah, Jessica, you just, yeah, share your thoughts. So again, I'm a guest in this country, and I, by talking to people, right, and reading and yeah, just living here, trying to understand what this society defines itself as. And what I do see in the last years, that this society definitely, yeah, there is not right now a common understanding of, we are the United States, we want our society to be this and this. These are sort of our ground and community rules, which are sort of everyone agrees on. And then on this we build up, and then we agree on having some different opinions on specific policy matters, but we figure it out. We have, you know, conversations and try to find compromises. Like, I really don't see this right now a lot in this country. So it's more, there's different groups, amazing, very diverse communities. But my understanding of this is that really those very individual groups sort of almost have to figure it out themselves. That's a little bit how I feel in this country. And so then it's up to them to either create their own community and again, try to deal with life and everything which, you know, awaits with life. They deal with it as a community. And if you're lucky, you are part of such a community. But again, from the federal, like, US government, there's not such an idea and mindset and sort of offer to create something like that, like nationwide. And so the question, who are those still this not too small Trump supporters? I think this is really a toxic mix of people. So let's say what clearly can't be neglected is that here is a certain amount of society is white, mainly, but not only, male dominated, people who have clear right-wing extremist mindset. They have been privileged for a long time. And I think in the last years, they have gotten the feeling that this society has become way too diverse and colorful. And that clearly means to them a threat, because this means that some of their privileges might be under threat because they might not be above other people within this society, right? And from this mindset, they really come and do want to roll back all the achievements of this society. So they are fed up with progressive policy. They don't want people to be same. They don't want to give up their privileges. That's the truth, right? And then maybe just to touch on maybe one other group, I have really tried to understand better why they, like some of them are Trump supporters, is maybe some parts within the Latina community. So states like Texas, Florida, we have a huge community with Latinas and Latinos who themselves, either in first or second generation, have moved to the United States. And some of them have luckily found a good life here and have created a good economic situation for them and their families. And again, some of those are like very strong and convinced Trump supporters. And I have come so far, again, as an external observer, that I do understand by now that I think it comes from the idea that they had a very hard time making it to the United States at some point. struggling through, right? Starting from scratch, not speaking the language, not getting any support, being discriminated, not being wanted, not being welcomed. And again, and then some of them, which is amazing, made it over probably many years of hard work and effort and discipline. Plus, then it's important to understand from sort of which countries they fled from, right? And some come from sort of socialist systems which haven't treated them well. So I do get, or I understand why when they hear like a candidate like Biden wants to come up with socialist policies, which me as a European, I'm always like, that's far from being socialist. But anyways, that's easily said. And so in the combination of, again, having a historical bad experience with socialist countries, plus having been in a situation where they had to create their lives all on their own and having been discriminated themselves, I want to say, I get why somebody like Trump is sort of appealing to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there is a gender gap, but racially or ethnically, it's quite mixed, a mixed picture, isn't it? So what do you think, Jessica?
I was going to say that we were being told the audience is free to ask questions.
Yeah.
Via Facebook, and I don't know what was the other platform. Yes, we just got a message that that we should remind them to ask questions now.
Okay, so
just wanted to interject that in. But I can just respond to that quickly.
So we can also include this in the discussion with our audience. So please, you would have the chance to ask questions to our panelists by writing into the Fragen und Antwort, questions and answers section. So, and we have the first question here already. Please go ahead. Yeah, I want to, the first question is, what about religious communities? Is there, if there is a gender gap, is there also a religious gap? Do you see any impact of the religious factor, and how does it look like concretely? Jessica, do you have any insights?
Not on the religious communities front, no. I actually am quite ignorant on.
There has been, I guess, a Pew poll by the Pew survey research, and they say that there is a religious vote. White Christians would vote for Trump, while other religious or secular constituencies would vote for Biden, or tend to vote for Biden. Yeah, so he seems to appeal to religious fundamentalists, not only, but also more comprehensively to Catholics. But as far Catholics and Protestants, as far as Black Catholics are concerned, I'm wondering whether this has any impact. Yeah, whether there are differences between white and non-white religious or Christians. Now, another question, thinking about the conservative Supreme Court judge just nominated. Right, this has been a triumph for Trump that he managed to rush this through. Do you think that this has attracted voters or unified the Republican Party also behind him? Following the hearings in the Senate, it was quite surprising how little the candidate said with respect to many questions, where she normally said, I don't have a position to share with you because this is a political question, and I'm not concerned as a judge with respect to abortion, with respect to even the question of what happens and how would the court decide if President Trump would refute to acknowledge a Biden victory. Yeah, so if this would go to the courts, no, this is a political question. I'm wondering whether she would really abstain what people would expect from her if she has declared so openly that these are not expert questions.
I think that that any win for Trump definitely sways his voters more towards him, and the Republican Party as well. I think that any time, so you know, him beating the coronavirus, I don't think that it's. I make the assumption that a lot of his constituents aren't very well researched, and so they kind of just believe a lot of what he says without doing any research themselves. Thinking back on the question of how is it possible that there are so many Trump supporters and voters, it makes me think of, I mean, two things. One that Nora said, but it makes me think of how is it possible that there was just found this extremist neo-Nazi secret factions in the German police units or in the German military units. We know that story that came out a few months ago. How is that possible? Because white supremacy is a disease. It infects everything, almost it touches. And I think that what Nora was saying about people ultimately feeling disenfranchised and looking for a place to call home, and there have been so many different kinds of people that have felt disenfranchised across the US, and definitely this constituency of poor white Americans, which have skewed very, very broad for Trump.
Yeah, you used an expression or a term, Jessica, which is resonance. Yeah, so whether the Black women who voted for Hillary, whether she responded to this constituency. And also the question is the poor white Americans. Apparently, Trump responds to their needs and expectations, but does his policy really? The question is whether this is just rhetoric, this is just a spectacle, a show, entertainment, or whether it's translated into policies that really would serve these constituencies to be better off. Well, getting to the question why the Republican Party is so united behind Trump, I find it also a very interesting phenomenon. There seemed to be also parts of the Republican Party with very different stances, more liberal, maybe not progressive, but conservative and liberal and more ethical, yeah, stances. But do you see the Republican Party united behind Trump, or do you see still these discrepancies? Difficult to say, to judge. Masha Gessen, she argues that Trump has created an autocratic form of power system in which he personally monopolizes power, and especially over the Republicans, the Republican Party, and the Republican members of Congress. Since, and this power is a very personal one, which means that he is distributing power and resources. And so everybody, maybe also through tweets, yeah, this is what she argues. So the electoral chances of Republican candidates now, we have elections not only of the president, but also for Senate and for the House. And so electoral chances, opportunities are very much depend on how good the terms are on which a candidate is with the president. So the president is very much in the center of this system of autocracy. This is what she argues. Not that the United States is already in an autocracy, but maybe half of its system tends to function and resemble more and more autocratic systems. Maybe it's an ambitious agenda to further develop the autocracy. So the Republican Party is plays this kind of game, yeah. Well,
I wanted to talk about the question that you posed, this one, and of liberal democracy. If the liberal democracy has failed, and I think a liberal democracy already failed a lot of its citizens and the citizens it was supposed to be protecting. And we've seen that failure not just in the US, but in different parts of democratic governments across the world. And we see that what we imagine to be a liberal democracy failed because it was so easily disrespected, overturned. And we've seen more of this fascist, autocratic rule in the US. And I think it should be worth investigating the specific points where it failed, and more importantly, who it failed, which requires a redefining of governmental overarching structures, how they actually function with society to work with communities. And failure is actually a really important tool if it doesn't go too far into an autocratic scheme, which it was leaning towards with Trump. I saw Angela Davis speak at Cambridge 2 years ago, and she said, I'm really glad that the civil rights movement failed, because if it had succeeded, it would have left out a lot of people. It would have left out the entire LGBTQIA community and many other marginalized groups. So I think we can try to imagine what is past a liberal democracy in the other direction, of course, and what's possible.
Great, yeah. So to finish, we are getting close to the end of our panel. To finish on a more, let's say, hopeful note, with respect to the future of the US and its allies or partners or competitors, who knows, in the world. What would you say? What are imagining a more responsive and a more liberal future, progressive future, let's say, with respect to democracy, international relations, and the internal, the domestic setup of the society? Do you have anything to recommend to our listeners, to our audience? What would you tell us to read, for example, to better understand where your hopes go?
To listen to, I highly recommend the 1619 podcast, which is by Hannah Nicole Jones, who actually won the MacArthur Genius Grant this year for that podcast. It's a really incredible podcast that kind of chronicles from the year 1619, when enslaved Africans were brought over to the United States, or kidnapped. I also recommend The Case for Reparations, the essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and The Fire This Time, which is a book by Jessamine Ward, a collection of essays. And it's more this next book is more talking about a UK scale, but it's still very, very important for notions of autocratic rule and white supremacy, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, by Rennie Edo-Lodge.
Thank you for these suggestions. We will certainly put them on paper, or ask you to put them on paper and make them available to those interested in it. And Nora, anything which would inspire you and which could inspire also our European or German observers of what is going on, to better understand the present, past, and future of the US?
Yeah, maybe my recommendation, which comes to mind right now, is not too much to better understand nor the past or of this society, but it's more, this is my recommendation because it really was sort of uplifting to me in the last couple of weeks when I saw this. It's a documentary. It's called Search. I'm going to post the link to it here right now. And I'm recommending this because, again, we wanted to end on a happier note. And so this documentary shows how 3 amazing, very different women in more rural areas decided, after Trump got elected in 2016, they decided to run for different political positions, including one very amazing Black woman who actually made it and is now a member of the House of Representatives here in Washington, D.C. on a federal level. So she made it. She decided to run with like no idea how you run for the political office. She didn't have any funding. She just had a group of a very supportive family and amazing friends. And the documentary again shows her and 2 other women who decided, I will no longer just, go on protests and talk about this within my friends. I need to be part of politics in the future, and that's why I need to run for office. And yeah, they just go into this political fight, which is a pretty tough and an ugly fight, especially here in the US, if you don't have money for a campaign. And again, it tells to some extent success stories, because some made it, some didn't succeed, but still learned along on the way, and they definitely created community. So sort of my positive outlook, and what I also feel being in the city right now is, again, we have experienced very dark times here in the last years, but at the same time, I do feel that this society and people who have not taken part in anything close to politics before, they now got so politicized, and they feel like it does matter, my vote matters. It matters that I go out there, that I talk to people, that I create allied groups. We can't fight this just with my own community, but we need to stick together. That's very much the atmosphere I definitely feel. And so this documentary somehow shows on a very local ground how exciting it can be to be part of politics, and that everyone can run for office. So yeah.
Put it in the chat. Or,
yeah.
Search.
And maybe we could add Jessica's recommendations.
Yes, I'll add it in.
Perfect. Perfect. And then there's also the chance to save the chat, I think, before we close down the Zoom call. So then we could even share this chat document again with all the participants.
Yeah, so we would ask our Heinrich Böll Foundation's friends from Bremen, Henning and Britta, to save this for us. Yeah,
we will do so.
You will do so. So the
I had one more recommendation because it's actually a German recommendation. It's a podcast. It's in English, but it takes place in Germany, and it's called Decolonization in Action. And that's a podcast by Dr. Edna Bonhomme, and it's a really brilliant podcast on how colonialism, basically on how to decolonize through art, activism, literature, research.
Yeah. So there is a lot of activism, of progressive activism in the States, and I think there have been manifold and very strong and admirable responses and reactions to the challenges which the Trump presidency and his campaign has posed to us. I think from a European perspective, I would be happy if in the US not a Superman, a superhero would prevail, but many of us, of ordinary people, journalists, yeah, like and ordinary people would really develop and empower themselves, develop agency, and continue the grassroots work, which has been so successful also over the past, especially also with respect to our transatlantic cooperation. I want to thank you very much, Jessica and Nora, for this very, very inspiring and hopeful conversation, and wishing you all the best to Washington, to Oslo, and to our audience. Thank you for your interest, your patience, and your input, and see you again to maybe at another occasion. Bye, and have a good night.
Thank you so much, Ulrike and Henning, and thanks to everyone for joining.